The city outside never truly slept, yet somewhere high above its endless noise, silence had already entered a forgotten room. Behind a plain hotel door in Manhattan, an elderly man rested alone while the lights of New York shimmered beyond the window, unaware that history was quietly closing one of its strangest chapters. No family waited beside him. No close friend sat nearby. No crowd gathered to honor him. Only scattered notebooks, carefully arranged instruments, and pages filled with impossible ideas remained as silent witnesses to a remarkable life. For several days, a small sign asking not to be disturbed had hung from the door. The hotel maid had noticed it each morning during her routine. At first, nothing seemed unusual. The elderly gentleman valued privacy and often disappeared into long hours of thought. But on this particular morning, an uneasy feeling refused to leave her. She knocked gently. No answer came. After waiting another moment, she unlocked the door and stepped inside, never imagining she was about to discover the final scene in the life of a man who had helped shape the modern world. The room felt strangely peaceful, almost too peaceful for a place where death had just passed through. A glass of milk sat near a few crumbs of bread. Papers covered with equations rested neatly across the desk, as though their owner had intended to return within minutes. Every object seemed placed with deliberate care, reflecting the habits of someone who believed order could reveal hidden truths. On the bed lay an old man whose heart had quietly stopped during the night. There were no final words, no farewell, no applause. Only silence remained. His name was Nikola Tesla. Today, nearly every modern city carries traces of his imagination. The electricity moving through countless homes, the machines that keep factories alive, and many technologies we rarely stop to notice, all owe something to ideas that first existed inside his restless mind. Yet the man who helped illuminate the world left it almost unnoticed. Perhaps that is one of history's cruelest ironies. How could someone who changed civilization spend his last days almost completely alone? And why does his story still feel unfinished? Before we search for those answers, take a quiet moment to subscribe if you enjoy thoughtful journeys through history, told with patience and heart. Every story here is not only about famous names, but about fragile human beings who carried impossible dreams long before the world understood them. Now, let your thoughts slow down. Let the noise of the present fade for a while. To understand the old man in that room, we must leave New York behind and travel back to a much older world. A world before glowing skylines, before electric streets, before power lines stitched cities together. We must return to a small village in the mountains of Europe, where night was still truly dark, and thunder still felt like a message from heaven. The village was quiet, remote, and easy for history to overlook. Stone houses stood beneath wide skies. Narrow paths curved between fields, churches, and wooded hills. Life moved according to seasons rather than machines. People rose with the morning light and worked until evening lowered itself over the land. In winter, snow could close the roads and make each household feel like an island. In summer, the mountains breathed with insects, wind, and the distant sound of animals returning home before dark. It was in this forgotten corner of the world that a storm began gathering one summer night. The clouds rolled over the mountains with a heaviness that made even the animals restless. The air changed first, becoming thick and charged, as though the sky itself was holding its breath. Then came the wind, then the rain, then the lightning, violent and bright, tearing open the darkness again and again. Each flash revealed the village for an instant, before the night swallowed everything back. Inside a modest house near the village church, another kind of struggle was unfolding. A woman was in labor, while the storm shook the walls around her. Every burst of thunder seemed to answer her pain. The room was dim, crowded, and tense. Those who stood nearby could hear the rain beating against the roof and feel the old fear that storms often carried into rural homes. In such places, nature was never just nature. A strange sky could become an omen. Lightning could become prophecy, Then, as another bolt split the heavens, the child arrived. For a brief moment, the room seemed suspended between terror and wonder. Outside, thunder rolled across the mountains. Inside, a newborn drew his first breath. The midwife, shaken by the violence of the storm, looked at the child and crossed herself. To her frightened mind, no ordinary destiny could belong to a baby born beneath such a sky. She whispered that this child would belong to darkness, as if the storm had already marked him. But the exhausted mother did not accept the omen, holding her newborn close. She answered, with a quiet strength that only a mother can possess. "No," she said, "he will be a child of light." Perhaps she meant only to protect him from superstition. Perhaps she wanted to push fear out of the room. Yet those words would one day seem almost prophetic. Light would follow him. Lightning would fascinate him. Electricity would become the language through which his imagination spoke to the future. They named the child Nikola. His father was an Orthodox priest, a stern and educated man who believed discipline shaped the soul. He was not a simple village preacher satisfied with routine. He collected books, wrote, argued, memorized, and expected the same seriousness from his children. In the evenings, the family home could feel less like a place of rest and more like a small school. Passages had to be remembered. Problems had to be solved in the mind. Every answer needed reason behind it. For a sensitive child, such a household could have felt demanding, even heavy. Yet it also built something powerful inside Nikola. His father trained memory as if it were a muscle. He sharpened logic like a blade. He believed that a weak mind could be strengthened through effort, just as a weak body could be strengthened through labor. There was little softness in his method, but there was purpose. Without knowing it, he was preparing his son for a life in which imagination alone would never be enough. Nikola's mother was different. She had never received the education given to men. She could not read books or write her ideas on paper. Yet her mind moved with unusual grace. She noticed small inconveniences that others accepted without question. If a tool wasted effort, she improved it. If a household task took too long, she invented a simpler way. Her hands were always making, adjusting, repairing, transforming ordinary objects into quiet solutions. She was an inventor without a title, a genius without a laboratory. Years later, Nikola would remember her with deep admiration. He believed that if she had been born in a different place or in a different century, the world might have known her name. That thought carries its own sadness. How many brilliant minds have passed through history unseen simply because they were born too early, too poor, too far from opportunity? His mother did not give him formal science, but she gave him something just as rare. She gave him the instinct to see what did not yet exist. From his father, Nikola inherited discipline. From his mother, he inherited invention. One gave him structure, the other gave him vision. Together, they created a child who would never be fully comfortable inside ordinary life. Even when he was young, there was something unusual about him. His thoughts moved quickly. His memory startled adults. Images appeared in his mind with such force that they seemed almost real. While other children played only with what they could touch, Nikola began living partly inside an invisible world of pictures, forces, and possibilities. The family was not built around Nikola alone. There were other children, other voices, other hopes. Among them was his older brother, a boy remembered as unusually gifted. Relatives admired him, neighbors praised him. His parents seemed to see in him a future bright enough to carry the family name forward. To young Nikola, this brother was more than a sibling. He was a model, a rival, a hero, close enough to touch. Children often measure themselves against the brightest person in the room, and Nikola was no exception. Then tragedy entered the house. His older brother died. When Nikola was still very young, the details would remain blurred by time, memory, and silence, but the effect was unmistakable. Grief settled over the family like a second winter. The child who had once stood in the shadow of his brilliant brother now stood beneath the weight of expectations that had nowhere else to go. His father, wounded by loss, turned his hopes toward Nikola. Love and pressure became difficult to separate. For Nikola, the death was not only a family sorrow, it became a private haunting, whether from memory, guilt, imagination, or the unbearable confusion of childhood. He carried the loss deep inside himself. Some wounds do not speak loudly. They simply follow a person from room to room, year after year, shaping ambition in ways no one else can see. Perhaps part of him spent the rest of his life trying to justify survival. Perhaps every great achievement was also an answer to a brother who never grew old. His father wanted him to become a priest. It was a respectable path, a sacred path, and perhaps in that household it seemed natural. But Nikola's heart was already turning elsewhere. He was drawn not to sermons, but to mechanisms, not only to scripture, but to rivers, wheels, wires, sparks, and unseen forces. He wanted to know how the world worked beneath its surface. What made lightning appear? What made motion possible? What hidden laws allowed nature to behave with such terrifying beauty? This conflict did not explode all at once. It grew slowly, as many family conflicts do. A father sees one future. A son feels another calling. Both believe they are protecting something important. Yet destiny rarely asks permission from the household. While his father imagined a life shaped by the church, Nikola was already listening to a different kind of thunder. Somewhere inside him, the storm from the night of his birth had never completely ended. It had only become quieter, waiting for the moment it would speak again. Grief has a strange way of changing a family. Sometimes it arrives like a violent storm that tears everything apart in a single night. Sometimes it settles quietly into every room, every conversation, every expectation, until no one remembers what life felt like before it came. After the death of his older brother, the Tesla household was no longer the same place. Laughter became less frequent. Silence lasted a little longer. Even ordinary days seemed to carry an invisible weight that no one knew how to lift. For young Nikola, the loss was impossible to understand. Children rarely possess the words to explain sorrow. Yet, they feel its presence more deeply than adults often realize. He had admired his brother with the unquestioning devotion only a younger child can have. Now, that guiding figure had vanished without warning, leaving behind questions that no one could answer. Years later, those who knew Tesla would often notice a quiet sadness beneath his confidence, as though part of him had remained in that childhood home beside the empty place where his brother once stood. Some historians have suggested that Nikola quietly blamed himself for the tragedy. Although the truth remains uncertain, what matters is not whether he was responsible, but that he carried the burden as though he were. Guilt does not always require facts. Sometimes it grows from imagination, especially inside the mind of a sensitive child. It becomes a silent companion, whispering that survival itself demands justification. Perhaps that is why Tesla spent his entire life chasing achievements so extraordinary that they seemed almost impossible. His father suffered differently. Losing his eldest son shattered dreams that had been carefully built over many years. The hopes once placed upon one child slowly shifted onto another. Without intending to, he began expecting Nikola to become everything that had been lost. Every lesson grew more serious. Every mistake felt larger. Every success carried the shadow of comparison. Love remained, but it now arrived wrapped inside expectation. And expectation can sometimes become heavier than anger. Yet beneath that pressure, another battle was quietly unfolding. Nikola respected his father deeply, but he could not silence the curiosity growing inside him. While religious teachings filled the family home, his own attention wandered toward nature. He found himself watching rivers for long periods, Without speaking, he examined spinning wheels, insects, streams, and clouds. With unusual concentration, ordinary children accepted the world as it appeared. Nikola wanted to understand the invisible forces hiding beneath every visible thing. When the family later moved to the larger town of Gospic, new opportunities slowly appeared before him. The streets were still modest by European standards, but compared with the isolated mountain village of his earliest years, the town seemed full of possibility. There were better schools, more books, more teachers, and new ideas arriving from distant cities. For the first time, young Nikola began meeting people whose lives extended beyond farming and village traditions. The horizon of his imagination quietly expanded. His teachers quickly realized they were dealing with an unusual student. Nikola possessed a memory that almost seemed unreal. He could read long passages only once before repeating them word for word. Complicated calculations appeared inside his mind almost instantly. Classmates sometimes assumed he had memorized answers in advance, unable to believe anyone could think so quickly. But the truth was stranger than that. He was not memorizing solutions, he was seeing them. Even more extraordinary was the way his imagination worked. When most people closed their eyes, they saw vague shapes or fading memories. Nikola saw complete objects with astonishing clarity. Machines appeared before him as though they had already been built. He could rotate them in his imagination, examine every angle, remove one piece, replace another, and watch the entire mechanism continue moving inside his mind. It was as if his thoughts contained an invisible workshop where every invention could be tested before a single tool ever touched metal. At first, this gift frightened him more than it inspired him. The images often appeared without warning. Brilliant flashes of light interrupted his vision. Familiar faces emerged before him with startling realism before disappearing again. Sometimes he struggled to separate imagination from reality. The line between the outer world and the inner world became dangerously thin. What others might have called dreams arrived while he was fully awake. For a young boy, such experiences were confusing enough to make him question his own mind. Fortunately, there was one person who seemed to understand him better than anyone else. His mother never dismissed these strange experiences as madness. Instead, she encouraged him to observe them carefully rather than fear them. She taught him patience. She reminded him that the mind could become either a faithful servant or a dangerous master, depending upon how it was trained. Without realizing it, she was helping her son develop the mental discipline that would later define his entire career. Slowly, Nikola learned to guide the images instead of being overwhelmed by them. He discovered that concentration could shape imagination, the same way careful hands shape clay. Rather than allowing thoughts to appear at random, he invited them deliberately. Each exercise strengthened his ability to hold complicated designs inside his memory for hours, sometimes days. While other students depended upon paper and sketches, Nikola increasingly relied upon the remarkable laboratory inside his own mind. Outside the classroom, his curiosity often produced unusual adventures. He loved building simple mechanical devices from whatever materials happened to be nearby. Sticks became wheels, rope became gears, discarded pieces of wood became experiments waiting to happen. Neighbors occasionally laughed at the strange little projects scattered around the family yard. Yet Nikola cared very little about their opinions. Failure never embarrassed him. Every broken invention simply suggested another possibility worth exploring. One winter evening, a seemingly ordinary moment changed everything. The family owned a large black cat with thick, soft fur. Nikola adored the animal and often spent long evenings stroking its back while sitting beside the fire. On one particularly cold night, the dry winter air filled the room with static electricity. As his small hand moved across the cat's fur, tiny blue sparks suddenly leaped into the darkness. Delicate threads of light danced between his fingers and the animal's coat. For a brief instant, It seemed as though the cat itself had begun glowing. The young boy froze in amazement. He reached out again. More sparks appeared. Again and again. It looked like magic. Yet somehow, he sensed there had to be an explanation hidden beneath the beauty. Fascinated, he hurried to his father and asked the question that would quietly shape the rest of his life. "What is this light?" His father smiled gently, before explaining that the tiny sparks came from the same mysterious force, responsible for lightning during great storms. Electricity, he said, existed not only in the distant sky, but also here, within ordinary objects, waiting to reveal itself under the right conditions. For many children, the answer would have satisfied curiosity for a single evening. For Nikola, it opened an entirely new universe. From that day forward, electricity ceased to be merely a scientific idea. It became something deeply personal. Whenever storms rolled across the mountains, he no longer saw random flashes frightening the villagers. He imagined invisible laws governing every bolt of lightning. He wondered whether that immense power could someday be understood, controlled, perhaps even shared with humanity. The question refused to leave him. It followed him through classrooms, through lonely walks, through quiet evenings, through every book he managed to borrow. Years later, when reporters asked where his lifelong fascination truly began, the answer could almost have pointed back to that silent winter room, a patient black cat, and a handful of blue sparks dancing across soft fur. Not long afterward, another childhood story planted itself just as deeply inside his imagination. One evening, a visiting relative described an astonishing place across the ocean called Niagara Falls. He spoke of water so vast that its roar could be heard from great distances. He described mist rising into the air, like clouds and endless torrents, crashing over towering cliffs with unimaginable force. Most children would have simply listened with wonder. Nikola could not stop thinking about it. That night, while everyone else slept, he lay awake imagining the waterfall in extraordinary detail. He pictured every drop of water rushing downward with unstoppable energy. Then, another image quietly appeared inside his mind. He saw an enormous wheel placed beneath the falling water, turning endlessly through the force of nature itself. The spinning wheel became motion. Motion became power. Power became possibility. The following morning, he confidently announced that one day he would travel to America and use that waterfall to create energy for the world. The adults smiled kindly. To them, it sounded like the impossible dream of an imaginative child. They could not know that the picture inside Nikola's mind was not fading fantasy. It was the first blueprint of a future that would eventually become real. Many years would pass before destiny carried him across the ocean. Many failures would stand between the dream and its fulfillment, but the image never disappeared. Like the storm that welcomed his birth, it waited patiently, growing stronger with every passing year, preparing the young boy for a future that almost no one around him could yet imagine. As Nikola grew older, people around him began noticing that he experienced the world differently. While most children observed what stood before their eyes, he seemed to notice what remained invisible. He was fascinated not only by what things were, but by what they could become. A simple water wheel was no longer just a machine for turning grain. In his imagination, it became the beginning of something much larger. A gust of wind suggested hidden energy. Flowing rivers whispered possibilities that no one else seemed able to hear. The natural world had become his first laboratory, and every ordinary day offered another experiment. His teachers admired his remarkable intelligence, but they were equally puzzled by the speed of his thinking. Mathematics rarely required paper. While other students carefully worked through each step, Nikola often answered before the problem had even been written across the entire blackboard. Some instructors believed he must have memorized the exercises in advance. Others suspected he was somehow cheating. Neither explanation came close to the truth. The answers simply appeared inside his mind, complete and fully formed, arriving long before words could explain how he had reached them. There were moments when this extraordinary gift became almost unbearable. Brilliant flashes of light would suddenly interrupt his vision without warning. Sometimes familiar landscapes appeared before him, so vividly that they seemed completely real. Faces emerged from memory with astonishing clarity before dissolving into empty air. Objects he imagined became almost impossible to distinguish from objects that truly existed. It was as though his imagination refused to remain inside his thoughts. Instead, it spilled outward into the world around him, demanding to be seen. Many children experiencing such visions might have become frightened for the rest of their lives. Nikola certainly felt fear in the beginning. There were moments when he questioned whether his own mind could be trusted, but little by little, he discovered something remarkable. Instead of resisting these powerful mental images, he could guide them. Concentration became the key. The more calmly he focused, the more clearly the visions obeyed him. What had first appeared as confusion slowly transformed into an extraordinary ability, unlike anything most people could imagine. Years later, engineers would wonder how Tesla designed machines that seemed almost perfect on their very first construction. The answer had begun during these quiet childhood years. Before touching metal, before drawing complicated blueprints, before asking craftsmen to build anything, he first assembled every invention inside his own imagination. There, he could examine every wheel, every wire, every bolt, every moving part. If something failed, he rebuilt it entirely within his mind. Only after countless invisible tests. It was an astonishing way of thinking. Even by modern standards, today, powerful computers create digital simulations before engineers manufacture complex machines. Nikola Tesla performed something strangely similar. Using nothing more than his own imagination, his mind became both laboratory and workshop. Mistakes could be discovered without wasting materials. Improvements could be made without lifting a single tool. Ideas matured quietly, inside silence, before revealing themselves to everyone else. Yet while his imagination expanded, another part of his personality was quietly becoming more unusual. He developed habits that seemed harmless at first, but gradually grew into lifelong compulsions. Numbers fascinated him. He counted almost everything around him: footsteps along the road, movements of his hands, bites during meals, windows in buildings. Even the shape and size of ordinary objects invited careful measurement. Certain numbers felt comfortable, while others seemed strangely unsettling. Among them all, one number slowly became almost sacred: 3. He preferred actions that could be divided by 3. If possible, he repeated routines 3 times. When entering a building, he often found himself walking around it before stepping through the door. At first, these behaviors appeared no different from the little rituals many children invent for themselves. No one imagined they would remain with him throughout his entire life. Growing stronger as the years passed, what others dismissed as harmless habits would eventually become one of the defining mysteries surrounding his personality. Despite these peculiarities, Nikola continued excelling at school. Books opened doors into worlds far beyond the mountains surrounding his home. Every scientific discovery excited him. Every mechanical invention suggested another unanswered question. While many classmates dreamed about comfortable professions or secure futures, he cared surprisingly little about wealth or status. Knowledge itself had become the greatest reward. Understanding nature felt more satisfying than possessing anything money could buy. Still, one difficult conversation refused to disappear. His father continued, hoping that Nikola would eventually enter the priesthood. From his perspective, it was an honorable path filled with purpose and stability. Becoming a priest would preserve family tradition and provide a respected place within society. To him, the choice seemed obvious, but every year that passed carried his son farther away from that future. His religion inspired reverence inside Nikola. Yet it was science that awakened wonder. He admired faith, but he longed to understand the hidden laws through which the universe itself seemed to speak. The disagreement remained quiet for a long time. Neither father nor son wished to wound the other. Nevertheless, silence often conceals the deepest conflicts. Every discussion about education eventually returned to the same question: what kind of man should Nikola become? Each believed they already knew the answer. Neither realized that history had already chosen a path beyond both of their expectations. When Nikola completed his early education, he was sent to attend a higher secondary school in the city of Karlovac. Leaving home marked one of the most important turning points of his young life. For the first time, he entered an environment where scientific curiosity was not merely tolerated, but encouraged. Classrooms contained equipment he had never seen before. Teachers demonstrated experiments. Instead of simply describing them, mathematics reached greater depths. Physics became something that could be observed rather than imagined. Every lesson seemed to widen the horizon before him. He threw himself into study with astonishing discipline. Classmates rested during free hours. Nikola continued reading. Evenings that others spent relaxing became opportunities for further learning. He possessed an almost limitless appetite for knowledge, as though each answer uncovered two new questions waiting beneath it. Teachers quickly recognized they were educating someone whose abilities reached far beyond ordinary academic excellence. One classroom demonstration remained with him more vividly than almost any other. His instructor presented a simple electrical motor to the students, explaining how electricity could be transformed into mechanical movement. Wires carried invisible energy. Magnetic forces created motion. Wheels began turning without horses, wind, or flowing water. While most students admired the cleverness of the machine, Nikola stared at it with complete fascination. He sensed immediately that this technology represented only the beginning of something far greater. After class ended, many students forgot the demonstration before reaching home. Nikola could not stop thinking about it. He imagined larger motors, smaller motors, faster motors, machines that wasted less energy, machines capable of changing entire industries. One simple lesson had quietly become another lifelong obsession. Around this time, he also developed a habit that would remain with him forever. Whenever a scientific problem captured his imagination, he refused to abandon it simply because no answer existed yet. Instead, he carried the question with him for weeks, months, sometimes years. While walking alone, eating dinner, or lying awake at night, the problem continued unfolding inside his thoughts. Eventually, often without warning, the solution would appear almost all at once, as though his subconscious had been working in silence long after his conscious mind had grown tired. Many of the greatest discoveries throughout history arrive this way, not through sudden genius alone, but through extraordinary patience, through minds unwilling to let go of difficult questions, through years spent quietly listening to possibilities invisible to everyone else. Nikola possessed that rare patience in abundance. The young student completed his studies more quickly than expected, earning admiration from nearly every teacher who knew him. Reports sent home praised not only his intelligence, but also his relentless work ethic. His father, reading those words, must have felt enormous pride. Perhaps he also believed his son would finally accept the future he had planned. But destiny had prepared another trial before either of them could speak seriously about university or careers. During the summer after returning home, disease swept through the region. Cholera. At that time, the illness terrified entire communities. Families watched healthy people become desperately ill within days. Doctors possessed few effective treatments. Many patients never recovered. When Nikola contracted the disease, his condition deteriorated rapidly. Fever consumed his strength. Dehydration left him barely able to speak. Weeks passed as he drifted between brief moments of consciousness and long periods of exhaustion. Relatives quietly prepared themselves for the possibility that another son might soon be lost. His father remained constantly beside the bed. The strict teacher disappeared. The worried parent remained, watching someone you love struggle between life and death changes every certainty you once believed permanent. Each passing day became a silent negotiation with hope itself. At one particularly desperate moment, believing he might never recover, Nikola gathered enough strength to speak. His request surprised everyone. He did not ask for comfort. He did not ask for wealth. He did not ask for relief from pain. Instead, he turned toward his father and whispered that if he survived, he wanted permission to study engineering. For a long moment, the room remained silent. The father, who had spent years dreaming of a priest, now faced the possibility of losing his son altogether. Suddenly, the future mattered less than survival. Finally, he made a promise. "If you recover," he said, "you will attend the finest technical school we can possibly find." Sometimes a single promise changes two lives at once. For Nikola, those words became something worth fighting for. For his father, they marked the quiet beginning of letting go of a dream he had carried for many years. Neither of them could have imagined where that promise would eventually lead. The road ahead would carry Nikola far beyond Europe, far beyond the expectations of his family, and into a rivalry that would change the modern world forever. Recovering from cholera was not like waking from a bad dream. Strength did not return overnight. Each morning demanded patience. Every short walk felt longer than the last. The young man who had once filled his days with endless curiosity now found himself learning something entirely different. He learned how fragile the human body could be. For weeks, the future remained uncertain. Yet somewhere beneath the exhaustion, one thought refused to fade. His father had made a promise, and for the first time, the path toward engineering no longer seemed like an impossible dream. There was, however, another obstacle standing in his way. Every young man within the Austrian Empire eventually faced compulsory military service. For most families, it was accepted as an unavoidable part of life. For Nikola, whose body had only just survived a devastating illness, the prospect seemed overwhelming. His father feared that the harsh demands of military life would destroy the recovery that had taken months to achieve. After everything their family had already endured, he was unwilling to take that risk. Instead of reporting for service, Nikola disappeared into the mountains. For nearly a year, he lived among shepherds, farmers, and remote families scattered across the rugged countryside. There were no classrooms waiting for him there, no laboratories, no libraries, only forests stretching across the hills, rivers cutting through stone valleys, and endless skies changing with the seasons. To many people, such isolation might have felt like exile. To Nikola, it became an unexpected gift. Without schedules or examinations to occupy his thoughts, his imagination grew even stronger. Long walks through the wilderness became quiet conversations with nature itself. He watched streams carve their way through rock with patient determination. He studied the movement of trees during powerful winds. He observed birds gliding across invisible currents that seemed almost magical. Every landscape reminded him that nature never wasted energy. Everything moved according to elegant laws waiting to be discovered. Those solitary months also transformed him physically. Fresh mountain air replaced the stale atmosphere of sick rooms. Climbing steep trails strengthened muscles weakened by disease. Simple meals, honest labor, and endless walking slowly restored the body that cholera had nearly destroyed. When he eventually returned home, friends were surprised by the change. The pale, fragile young man had become stronger, calmer, and strangely more confident than before. Sometimes life prepares us for greatness, not by giving us comfort, but by removing every comfort we once depended upon. At last, the opportunity he had dreamed about finally arrived. At 19 years of age, Nikola entered the Austrian Polytechnic Institute in Graz, one of the finest technical schools available within the empire. As he stepped onto the campus for the first time, he felt something he had rarely experienced before. It was not simply excitement, it was recognition. After years of searching, he had finally reached a place where curiosity itself was welcomed, rather than restrained. From the very beginning, his commitment astonished everyone around him. While many students balanced study with leisure, Nikola devoted nearly every waking hour to learning. Lectures filled his mornings, private study occupied his afternoons, evenings disappeared beneath stacks of books, complicated calculations, and endless scientific discussions. Professors often found him reading long after other students had gone to sleep. Friends wondered how anyone could maintain such exhausting discipline. To Nikola, however, it never felt like sacrifice. He simply could not imagine living any other way. His academic performance quickly became extraordinary. Examination scores ranked among the highest in the institution. Difficult mathematical problems seemed almost effortless. Complex theories that confused many classmates became clear after only a single explanation. Professors praised both his intelligence and his determination. Some privately predicted that he would one day become one of the finest engineers in Europe. For a brief period, everything appeared to be unfolding exactly as he had once hoped while lying weak and feverish in bed. Then, one ordinary lecture quietly altered the direction of his entire life. The class gathered to observe a demonstration involving an electrical machine known as a direct current motor. The professor carefully explained its operation, pointing to the commutator, the mechanical component responsible for reversing the flow of electricity. Sparks jumped between the moving parts as the machine operated. Most students accepted those sparks as unavoidable. The technology worked. Even if imperfectly, Nikola could not stop staring at the machine. The sparks bothered him. They represented wasted energy, unnecessary friction, avoidable inefficiency. His thoughts immediately moved beyond the demonstration itself. What if the machine did not require a commutator at all? What if electricity could somehow perform the same task without mechanical switching? The idea appeared almost instantly, not as a complete invention, but as a question too fascinating to ignore. Unable to remain silent, he raised his hand and respectfully suggested another possibility. Perhaps, he proposed, alternating current could replace the mechanical system entirely. Perhaps the magnetic field itself could be made to rotate. The classroom fell quiet. The professor looked directly at him. Then came the reply. It was not cruel, yet it carried unmistakable certainty. The professor explained that such an idea belonged among impossible dreams. Removing the commutator, he insisted, would be no different from attempting perpetual motion. It could not be done, because nature itself would not allow it. Before the entire class, the young student was politely but firmly dismissed. Many people would have accepted the criticism. Most would have forgotten the conversation within days. Nikola did exactly the opposite. Instead of abandoning the question, he carried it with him. The professor believed the problem had been answered. Nikola believed it had only just begun. Sometimes, the greatest discoveries begin with someone saying that something cannot be done. Those words can become walls, or they can become invitations. For Nikola, they became an obsession. Every free moment returned him to the same unanswered question. While walking across campus, he imagined invisible magnetic fields spinning through space. While eating dinner, he mentally rearranged electrical circuits. While lying awake at night, he continued constructing machines that existed nowhere except inside his imagination. The challenge refused to leave him because, deep inside, he felt that nature itself was pointing toward a different answer. His first year at the university ended in remarkable success. Professors praised him enthusiastically. Letters sent to his family described an exceptional student whose future appeared almost limitless. After years of hardship, disappointment, illness, and uncertainty, It finally seemed that life had begun rewarding his perseverance. But even the brightest paths sometimes hide unexpected shadows. During his second year, another influence quietly entered his life. It began almost harmlessly. A few classmates invited him to join casual games of billiards. Later came card games, small wagers, friendly competition. To an analytical mind fascinated by mathematics and probability, gambling initially seemed less like entertainment and more like another intellectual puzzle waiting to be solved. At first, he won, then he lost. Then he became determined to recover those losses. Without realizing it, curiosity slowly transformed into habit, and habit quietly approached addiction. The disciplined student, who had once devoted every spare hour to science, found himself spending increasing amounts of time inside gaming halls instead of libraries. Lectures became easier to skip. Late nights studying became late nights chasing impossible recoveries. Every loss promised that the next game might restore everything. Every victory encouraged another wager. It was the oldest illusion gambling has ever offered. And, like countless intelligent people before him, Nikola believed he could outthink it. His grades slowly began to suffer. Attendance declined. The brilliant student professors had admired seemed to disappear beneath growing distraction. Letters sent home no longer carried praise alone. Concern began replacing admiration. Instructors who had once predicted greatness now worried that one of their most gifted students was quietly throwing away every opportunity placed before him. For Nikola, the decline happened gradually enough that he scarcely noticed it himself. That is often how personal downfall begins, rarely with one dramatic decision, more often through small compromises repeated day after day, until an entirely different life has quietly taken shape. Before long, debts accumulated faster than victories. Financial pressure increased. Embarrassment grew heavier. Instead of asking for help, he withdrew from many of the people who cared about him. The confidence that had carried him through years of hardship slowly gave way to frustration. Beneath the surface, he still possessed extraordinary ability. Yet ability alone could not rescue someone who had lost direction. The young man who had once imagined changing the future now faced the painful possibility of failing to complete his education at all. He could not yet know it, but the difficult years ahead would test him far more severely than any classroom examination ever had, and it would take one heartbreaking loss to bring him back to the path he had almost abandoned forever. The collapse came more quietly than anyone expected. There was no dramatic farewell, no public humiliation, no single moment that announced everything had fallen apart. Instead, one missed lecture became several. One unpaid debt became another. Assignments remained unfinished. Opportunities slipped away one after another, until the brilliant young student, who had once amazed his professors, found himself standing at the edge of failure, wondering how he had wandered so far from the future he had imagined. Eventually, the university informed him that he no longer met the requirements to continue his studies. Years of extraordinary promise seemed to dissolve into disappointment almost overnight. Leaving Graz was one of the hardest decisions he had ever faced. He could not bear the thought of returning home immediately and facing the father who had sacrificed so much to help him reach that place. Shame often convinces people that distance is easier than honesty. Nikola believed disappearing would hurt less than admitting he had failed. Instead of returning to his family, he traveled to the town of Maribor, where he accepted work as a draftsman. The position paid little, but it allowed him to remain unnoticed. Each morning, he reported to work, carefully drawing technical plans that belonged to other people instead of pursuing the inventions, filling his own imagination. The days felt strangely empty. He completed his responsibilities with precision. Yet every evening, he returned to a small rented room, carrying the quiet feeling that he had somehow stepped away from the life he was meant to live. The loneliness was unlike anything he had experienced before. In the classroom, he had been surrounded by teachers, classmates, and conversations about science. Now his world had grown painfully small. After work, he wandered through unfamiliar streets or sat inside crowded taverns where card games continued, tempting him with the false promise that tomorrow's luck might erase yesterday's mistakes. He understood that gambling had already stolen precious years from him, yet breaking free from its grip proved far more difficult than simply recognizing the danger. Back home, his family knew almost nothing about where he had gone. Letters arrived, asking friends whether anyone had seen him. His father searched anxiously for news of his missing son. Each passing week deepened the fear that something terrible might have happened. Nikola, meanwhile, remained hidden behind ordinary routines, believing that avoiding disappointment somehow protected the people he loved. In reality, silence often causes more pain than difficult truths ever could. Months passed before chance finally intervened. Local authorities discovered that he lacked the proper residency documents required to remain in Maribor. After questioning him, they arranged for his return to Gospic. The journey home felt far longer than the distance suggested. Every passing kilometer brought him closer to a conversation he had been postponing for nearly a year. He imagined his father's disappointment. He rehearsed explanations that never seemed sufficient. No matter what words he chose, failure remained impossible to disguise. When father and son finally stood face to face again, neither spoke immediately. There are moments in life when silence contains more emotion than conversation ever could. The older man saw before him not the confident student who had left for university, but a tired young man carrying regret in every expression. Nikola saw not only his father, but the person whose faith he believed he had betrayed. Forgiveness may have been possible, yet neither of them knew how to begin. Before that relationship could fully heal, tragedy struck once again. Not long after Nikola returned home, his father became seriously ill. The decline happened quickly. The man who had spent years guiding his family through discipline and determination now found his own strength fading. Doctors could do little. Loved ones watched helplessly as his condition worsened day by day. Then, in the spring of 1879, he passed away. The loss shattered Nikola. Throughout his life, he would remember that his father died while believing his brilliant son had abandoned the future they had both fought so hard to create. Whether that belief was entirely true mattered very little. It became the version of the story Nikola carried inside himself. Grief mixed with guilt until separating one from the other became impossible. Once again, he found himself asking whether he had failed someone who believed in him. Yet something changed after the funeral. Sometimes suffering breaks a person. Sometimes it awakens one. Standing beside his father's grave, Nikola quietly made a decision that would influence everything that followed. He would no longer allow distraction to control his life. Gambling had taken enough. Regret had taken enough. If he wished to honor the sacrifices made for him, he would have to begin again, regardless of how impossible rebuilding might seem. Few people ever witness that private promise. History usually celebrates public victories. It rarely notices the invisible decisions that make those victories possible. From that moment forward, Nikola fought the gambling addiction with extraordinary determination. Unlike many people who recover gradually, he approached the problem with the same relentless discipline he applied to science. He refused to negotiate with temptation. He refused to convince himself that one final game would cause no harm. Instead, he cut the habit from his life completely. Years later, he would proudly say that he had conquered gambling through will alone. Considering the depth of his earlier struggle, the achievement was almost as remarkable as many of his scientific discoveries. Determined to continue his education, he enrolled briefly at Charles Ferdinand University in Prague. Circumstances prevented him from completing a full course of study. Yet the experience restored something even more valuable than academic credits. It restored confidence. Once again, he found himself surrounded by books, ideas, and conversations that reminded him who he truly was. He no longer saw himself as a failed student hiding from disappointment. He began seeing himself as an engineer whose journey had simply taken a painful detour. Still, he understood that education alone would not create the future he envisioned. He needed practical experience. He needed to work with real machines, real electrical systems, and real engineers solving real problems. Fortune soon provided exactly that opportunity. In the early 1800s and 80s, Europe stood on the edge of enormous technological change. Telephones were beginning to connect cities. Electric lighting slowly replaced older methods of illumination. Industries searched desperately for engineers capable of building the infrastructure of a new age. One growing company offered Nikola a position in Budapest, where a modern telephone exchange was under construction. He accepted immediately. Arriving in Budapest felt like stepping into tomorrow. Compared with the quiet towns of his youth, the city pulsed with energy. Streets bustled with merchants, workers, students, musicians, and inventors. Newspapers carried reports of scientific breakthroughs happening across Europe and America. Conversations inside cafes drifted effortlessly from politics to philosophy to engineering. For someone whose imagination had always stretched beyond the familiar, the city felt wonderfully alive. Nikola immersed himself in his new responsibilities. The telephone exchange demanded careful attention to detail. Every connection had to function reliably. Every mechanical problem required thoughtful solutions. Supervisors quickly noticed that the quiet, young engineer possessed unusual talent. He repaired equipment others considered hopeless. He proposed practical improvements instead of merely following instructions. Colleagues respected not only his intelligence, but also the calm confidence with which he approached complicated technical challenges. Yet, even while excelling at his work, one question refused to release its grip. The memory of that classroom in Graz returned again and again. The professor, the direct current motor, the impossible idea, the rotating magnetic field. Years had passed since that lecture, but the challenge remained unfinished inside his mind. Every evening after work, he continued exploring invisible machines no one else could see. Sometimes he filled notebooks with sketches. More often, he needed no paper at all. The designs existed clearly enough inside his imagination that drawing them felt almost unnecessary. Then, one evening, something extraordinary happened. It was late afternoon, as Nikola walked through a park with a close friend. The setting sun bathed the trees in warm golden light, while long shadows stretched across the paths. They talked about literature, philosophy, and poetry, as they often did during their evening walks. Nikola began reciting lines from one of his favorite works, allowing the familiar rhythm of the words to settle his restless thoughts. Suddenly, he stopped walking. His friend looked at him in confusion. Nikola's expression had completely changed. His eyes seemed fixed upon something invisible, standing directly before him. Without saying another word, he picked up a stick lying beside the path and began drawing rapidly across the dirt. Circles appeared, first, then lines, then coils, arrows, rotating fields. The design flowed from his hand with astonishing certainty, as though he were copying something already complete rather than inventing it. At that moment, the answer he had been searching for over many years finally arrived. The impossible machine was no longer impossible. It was real, and before the world could recognize its importance, it existed first inside the imagination of a young engineer standing quietly beneath the evening sky. For a few long moments, neither man spoke. The evening breeze continued moving through the trees, while the city carried on around them, completely unaware that history had quietly shifted beneath its feet. Nikola remained, kneeling beside the path, his stick moving rapidly across the ground, as though an invisible teacher were guiding his hand. Circles became coils. Coils became magnetic fields. Every line connected perfectly to the next. There was no hesitation, no uncertainty, no need to erase or begin again. After years of searching, the answer had arrived all at once. His friend watched in astonishment. Only minutes earlier, they had been discussing poetry beneath the setting sun. Now, Nikola seemed entirely absorbed by another world. He pointed excitedly toward the rough sketches covering the dirt and explained that the magnetic field itself could be made to rotate without the need for a mechanical commutator. Electricity would no longer have to be forced into changing direction by moving parts. Instead, alternating currents could create a continuously rotating field capable of driving a motor with remarkable simplicity and elegance. To anyone else, the drawings looked like little more than strange circles and scattered lines. To Nikola, they represented years of frustration finally dissolving into clarity. He could already see the machine operating inside his imagination. He watched the invisible rotor turning smoothly. He observed every magnetic force, interacting exactly as it should. There were no sparks, no unnecessary friction, no complicated switching mechanism wearing itself apart. The impossible machine his professor had dismissed now existed as clearly in his mind as though it had already been built. Moments like these are difficult to explain. Throughout history, many extraordinary discoveries have arrived, not through gradual calculation, but through sudden insight. Mathematicians have awakened with complete proofs already formed in their thoughts. Composers have heard entire symphonies before writing a single note. Artists have described paintings appearing fully finished inside their imagination. Nikola experienced something remarkably similar. Years of patient thinking had quietly prepared his mind until, without warning, every scattered idea suddenly joined together into one elegant solution. Yet, unlike many dreamers, he possessed something equally important. He trusted what he saw. Another person might have dismissed the vision as imagination. Nikola believed imagination was often the first place where reality revealed itself. Rather than rushing into a workshop, he continued refining the invention entirely within his thoughts. Every evening after work, he returned to the invisible motor. He slowed its movement, examined every component, changed the arrangement of coils, tested different configurations, and watched each version operate in perfect detail. If one design failed, he simply rebuilt it mentally. If another seemed more efficient, he allowed it to continue evolving. The laboratory inside his mind required no materials, no funding, and no permission from anyone. This remarkable ability often made people misunderstand him. Colleagues sometimes assumed he spent too much time daydreaming. Others believed he lacked urgency because he delayed building physical models. In reality, he was working almost constantly. While others relied upon tools and blueprints, Nikola relied upon visualization so precise that mistakes could be discovered before any metal had been shaped. What looked like quiet reflection often represented weeks of invisible engineering taking place beyond the reach of ordinary observation. Still, brilliant ideas alone rarely change the world. They require opportunity, they require resources, and perhaps most importantly, they require someone willing to believe before proof becomes obvious. Nikola understood that remaining in Budapest would not allow his invention to reach its full potential. The city had offered valuable experience, but it could not provide the industrial environment necessary to transform revolutionary concepts into practical machines. Europe itself was changing rapidly, and nowhere did those changes move faster than Paris, where one of the largest electrical companies on the continent continued expanding its operations. Through friends and professional connections, Nikola received an opportunity to join Continental Edison, the European branch of the company founded by one of the most famous inventors alive. Thomas Edison had already become an international symbol of innovation. His electrical systems were spreading across cities. Investors admired him. Newspapers celebrated him. To many young engineers, Working for an organization, carrying his name, represented the greatest opportunity imaginable. Nikola accepted without hesitation. Arriving in Paris introduced him to an entirely different scale of engineering. Electrical installations stretched across factories, theaters, public buildings, and growing neighborhoods. Every project demanded careful planning and constant problem-solving. Failures could not simply be discussed in classrooms. They had to be repaired quickly, because entire businesses depended upon reliable electrical power. The pace was exhausting. Yet Nikola thrived beneath the pressure. Supervisors soon noticed his unusual ability to diagnose technical problems. Others struggled to understand. Malfunctioning generators that had frustrated experienced engineers often revealed their secrets after only a brief inspection. Where others replaced parts through trial and error, Nikola searched for underlying causes. He preferred understanding problems rather than merely fixing symptoms. This habit earned both admiration and respect among those who worked beside him. His assignments gradually became more demanding. Instead of remaining in one location, he traveled throughout Europe, repairing complicated electrical systems wherever difficulties appeared. Railway stations, industrial plants, and commercial installations all presented new challenges. Every journey expanded both his knowledge and his confidence. More importantly, each project strengthened his belief that existing electrical technology still contained enormous room for improvement. During one assignment in Strasbourg, he finally found an opportunity that had lived inside his imagination for years. Working during spare hours, using whatever materials he could obtain, Nikola quietly assembled the first physical version of the motor he had already perfected countless times within his thought. There was no audience waiting, no newspaper reporters, no wealthy investors, only a determined engineer standing beside a machine almost no one believed could exist. The moment finally arrived. Power flowed into the motor. For an instant, nothing happened. Then the rotor began turning, smoothly, quietly, exactly as he had watched it turn inside his imagination hundreds of times before. There were no violent sparks erupting from a commutator, because no commutator existed. There was no complicated mechanical switching, only graceful motion produced by rotating magnetic fields, acting exactly as nature had always intended. It was one of the happiest moments of his young life. Years of doubt disappeared within seconds. The professor had been wrong. The impossible had become real. Yet proving an idea and convincing others to believe it are rarely the same thing. When Nikola proudly demonstrated the motor to colleagues, their reactions disappointed him. Many admired the clever engineering, but few understood its enormous significance. They remained deeply committed to direct current technology, because that was the system already being built across Europe. Businesses rarely abandon successful investments simply because something better appears. Familiar solutions often feel safer than revolutionary ones. Even when the revolution has already begun, once again, Nikola found himself carrying a discovery the world was not yet ready to embrace. Fortunately, one experienced engineer saw beyond the immediate skepticism. His name was Charles Batchelor. After observing Nikola's abilities and listening carefully to his ideas, Batchelor reached a simple conclusion. If anyone might recognize the true importance of this remarkable young engineer, it would be Thomas Edison himself in America. One conversation changed everything. "You should go to America," Batchelor told him. "Take your ideas there. The future is waiting across the ocean." Those words settled deeply inside Nikola's thoughts. America, the country he had imagined since childhood. The land where Niagara Falls thundered endlessly. The place where industry expanded faster than anywhere else on Earth. Perhaps destiny had been quietly guiding him toward that distant shore all along. Batchelor believed strongly enough in the young engineer that he prepared a letter of introduction addressed to Thomas Edison. According to later accounts, he described Nikola with extraordinary confidence, suggesting that only two truly great men deserved comparison: Edison himself and the quiet engineer standing before him. Whether every word of the famous letter survives exactly as history remembers matters less than what it represented. Someone whose judgment carried real weight had placed enormous trust in Nikola's future. During the summer of 1884, he prepared for the greatest journey of his life. He possessed very little money, only a handful of personal belongings, a few books, the clothes he could carry, and ideas that existed nowhere except inside his extraordinary imagination. Everything else remained uncertain. Crossing the Atlantic meant leaving behind family, language, familiar streets, and nearly every certainty he had ever known. Success was not guaranteed. Failure seemed entirely possible. Countless immigrants before him had crossed the ocean, chasing dreams that dissolved upon arrival. Nikola understood those risks. Yet something inside him insisted that remaining where he was would become an even greater failure. Sometimes the most courageous decision is not believing success is certain. It is choosing to move forward, despite knowing it is not. As the ship slowly pulled away from Europe, Nikola stood watching the coastline disappear into the distance. Somewhere beyond the horizon waited a country racing toward the future. Somewhere beyond that ocean waited a meeting that would become one of the most famous rivalries in scientific history. He could not yet know that America would bring him extraordinary triumph, heartbreaking disappointment, worldwide fame, crushing poverty, and a legacy unlike almost any other inventor before or since. For now, he was simply a young engineer sailing toward an unknown continent with little more than determination and a dream the rest of the world had not yet learned to see. The voyage across the Atlantic was far from comfortable, and the ocean seemed almost indifferent to the ambition of the passengers crossing it. The ship rose and fell beneath restless waves, while wind moved across the deck with a cold persistence. For many people aboard, America was not merely a destination, but a final attempt at beginning again. Nikola often stood quietly near the rail, watching the gray horizon stretch endlessly before him, wondering what kind of life waited beyond that vast and uncertain water. He carried very little with him. A few personal belongings, some clothes, several notebooks, and a letter of introduction from Charles Batchelor were among his most valuable possessions. Yet the most important things he brought to America could not be packed or counted. They lived inside his mind. Years of invisible experiments, carefully refined machines, and ideas that had not yet found a place in the world crossed the ocean with him. No storm could take them, and no thief could understand their value. By the time the ship approached New York, much of the little money he had brought was already gone. Later accounts would describe theft, misfortune, and confusion during the journey. Though the exact details have become difficult to separate from legend, what remained clear was that Nikola arrived in America with almost nothing material to protect him. Another man might have been terrified by such a beginning, but he had already survived illness, failure, poverty, and disappointment. Starting over had become painfully familiar. When New York finally appeared through the morning haze, it must have seemed less like a city than a living machine. Buildings rose above the harbor. Smoke drifted from factories. Ferries crossed the water in constant motion. Workers filled the docks. Carts moved through crowded streets, and the air itself seemed charged with industry. Compared with the quiet towns of Europe, this place felt unfinished, hungry, and impatient. America did not appear to be waiting for the future. It appeared to be building it by force. For a young engineer who had spent his life thinking about energy, the city was overwhelming. Everywhere he looked, motion surrounded him. Steam engines breathed, wheels turned, wires stretched between buildings, and human ambition seemed to move with the same urgency as the machines. There was beauty in it, but also danger. New York offered opportunity to those strong enough to survive its pace, yet it could just as easily swallow strangers without remembering their names. Nikola stepped onto American soil, carrying only a few coins and a great deal of uncertainty. He had no wealthy family waiting, no powerful friends standing at the dock, and no public reputation that could open doors for him. What he did have was the letter from Bachelor, addressed to Thomas Edison, one of the most celebrated inventors of the age. In that letter rested a fragile bridge between a poor immigrant and the most famous electrical empire in America. By the 1880s, Edison had already become a symbol of modern invention. Newspapers called him a wizard. Investors trusted his judgment, and ordinary people associated his name with the miracle of electric light. His companies were spreading direct current systems into cities, promising to replace gas lamps with controlled illumination. To the public, Edison represented practical genius. He was not a distant theorist, but a man who built, tested, failed, tried again, and eventually produced devices the world could see and buy. Nikola and Edison could hardly have been more different. Edison believed discovery came through endless experiment, through trying one material after another until something finally worked. He trusted the workshop more than theory, and he admired persistence more than elegance. Nikola approached invention from the opposite direction. Before building a machine, he created it inside his imagination. He tested it mentally, adjusted it silently, and corrected flaws before metal was ever touched. Both men were brilliant, but their minds moved through different worlds. When Nikola finally met Edison, there was little ceremony. America moved too quickly for delicate introductions. Edison saw before him a thin, serious young engineer from Europe, carrying strong recommendations and an intensity that was difficult to ignore. Nikola saw a man whose name had already become almost mythical. Perhaps they recognized talent in each other immediately. Perhaps they also sensed, without fully understanding it, that admiration would not be enough to overcome the distance between their philosophies. Edison hired him, and the work began almost at once. There was no gentle period of adjustment. Machines needed repairs, customers needed electricity, and technical failures demanded immediate solutions. Nikola entered the work with the same intensity he had brought to every serious challenge of his life. He arrived early, stayed late, and treated each malfunctioning machine as a puzzle whose hidden logic had to be uncovered. Before long, his ability to solve difficult problems became difficult for others to ignore. The company benefited from his talent quickly. Generators ran more efficiently after his attention. Complicated failures that had frustrated other engineers became understandable once he examined them. He did not merely replace broken parts. He searched for the deeper cause behind each failure, as if every machine were trying to confess its weakness to anyone patient enough to listen. This habit made him valuable, but it also reminded him that the existing system itself had limitations no repair could permanently solve. Edison's direct current system worked, but to Nikola, it seemed trapped inside narrow boundaries. Power stations had to remain close to customers because electricity weakened over distance. Expanding the network required more stations, more copper, more labor, and more expense. Many engineers accepted these problems as unavoidable because they belonged to the system everyone already understood. Nikola saw them differently. He believed they were signs that the world was still using an incomplete answer. Inside his mind, another future had already taken shape. Alternating current could travel farther and more efficiently. Transformers could raise and lower voltage as needed. A single powerful generating station might someday serve distant homes, factories, and cities. Waterfalls far from urban centers could become sources of light for places many kilometers away. This was not a vague fantasy to him. It was a practical vision, built from years of thought, experiment, and certainty. Yet technology does not advance through truth alone. It must pass through money, reputation, fear, and habit. Edison's companies had invested deeply in direct current, and entire business plans depended upon its success. To suggest a different system was not merely to propose an improvement, It was to challenge an empire already under construction. Nikola understood this, so he continued doing the work placed before him while waiting for a moment when his larger ideas might finally be heard. That moment seemed to arrive through a demanding assignment. According to one of the most repeated stories from this period, Edison offered Nikola a large reward if he could redesign and improve a series of direct current generators. The amount was said to be $50,000, a fortune so great that it would have changed the life of almost any young immigrant. For Nikola, the money mattered, but recognition mattered even more. The challenge seemed to prove that his ability had finally been seen. He accepted the task with complete seriousness. For months, he worked with exhausting dedication, studying the machines, correcting weaknesses, redesigning parts, and improving performance. The project required not only intelligence, but endurance. Each improvement opened the way to another. Each solved problem revealed a deeper possibility. He pushed himself harder than most people would have thought reasonable. But he had always believed that extraordinary work demanded extraordinary discipline. By the end, the generators had been significantly improved. When Nikola finally approached Edison about the promised reward, the answer wounded him deeply. Edison reportedly laughed and told him that he did not understand American humor. Whether the exact wording has been polished by memory and retelling, the emotional truth remains clear. Nikola believed he had been promised something serious, and he believed that promise had been broken. It was not only the loss of money that hurt him, it was the feeling that trust itself had been treated as a joke. Something changed inside him after that. He had crossed an ocean, believing that talent and hard work might speak for themselves in America. Now he saw that genius could still be used, overlooked, and dismissed when it served another man's system. He did not explode in public anger. He did not try to turn the story into a spectacle. Instead, he made a quiet decision that would alter the course of electrical history. He would no longer spend his life improving a future he did not believe in. Leaving Edison's company meant stepping away from security and returning once again to uncertainty. He had no great fortune behind him, no laboratory waiting, and no guarantee that anyone would support his alternating current vision. But remaining would have cost him something even greater than money. It would have required him to bury the very idea he believed could transform the world. So Nikola Tesla walked away, poor but free, carrying the invisible machinery of a new age inside his mind. Leaving Edison's company did not immediately lead to opportunity. Instead, it brought another season of uncertainty, one that tested Nikola far more than many people realize. History often remembers great inventors standing beside remarkable machines, but it rarely pauses to remember the difficult months when those same people struggled simply to survive. After resigning, Nikola once again found himself without stable income, without influential supporters, and without any guarantee that the ideas filling his mind would ever become more than invisible dreams. To pay his expenses, he accepted whatever honest work he could find. For a period of time, the man who believed he could transform the world's electrical systems earned money digging ditches for utility companies. Each day, he stood beneath the sun with ordinary laborers, breaking hard ground with a shovel instead of designing revolutionary machines. The contrast could not have been greater. The engineer who imagined transmitting electricity across continents now spent his hours carving narrow trenches through the earth, earning barely enough to pay for food and shelter. It would have been easy for bitterness to consume him during those months. Many people would have looked at the shovel in their hands and concluded that life had been unfair. Yet those who later worked closely with Nikola noticed something remarkable about him. Even while performing exhausting physical labor, his mind never stopped creating. During breaks, he continued thinking about alternating current. While others discussed wages or weather, he quietly refined electrical systems that no one else around him could see. Hardship had slowed his progress, but it had not changed his direction. One of the workers who spent time beside him later recalled conversations that sounded almost unbelievable. Nikola spoke confidently about a future in which electricity could travel across enormous distances with very little loss. He described powerful motors without commutators and imagined factories running on systems completely different from those being installed throughout America, to men earning their living with shovels. Such ideas seemed closer to fantasy than engineering. Too few could have guessed that the quiet immigrant working beside them was describing the electrical future of the modern world. Sometimes history turns not through famous speeches or dramatic discoveries, but through chance meetings between ordinary people. During this difficult period, Nikola was introduced to Alfred Brown, a businessman with an interest in new technologies, and Charles Peck, an attorney experienced in developing commercial ventures. Unlike many investors of the time, they possessed something far more valuable than money alone. They possessed curiosity. Instead of dismissing Nikola's ideas as impossible, they listened carefully while he explained the principles of alternating current and the rotating magnetic field. The meetings stretched into long conversations. Nikola rarely spoke with unnecessary excitement. He explained his ideas calmly, almost as though he were describing something that already existed. He believed the elegance of the science would speak for itself. Brown and Peck quickly realized they were not listening to an ordinary inventor searching for financial support. They were listening to someone who saw the electrical world from an entirely different perspective. What impressed them most was not only the brilliance of the inventions, but the certainty with which Nikola described them. They agreed to support him. For the first time since arriving in America, Nikola finally had partners willing to invest not only in his inventions, but also in the future. They represented together. They established a laboratory in New York, where he could devote himself entirely to research and development. After years of carrying extraordinary machines inside his imagination, he finally possessed a place where those machines could become physical reality. The small workshop was modest compared with the great industrial laboratories of the day, but to Nikola, it felt like freedom itself. The laboratory quickly became a place of relentless creativity. Every morning brought new experiments. Every afternoon produced fresh designs. Every evening ended with another improvement. Visitors often found Nikola moving from one workbench to another with intense concentration, stopping only long enough to sketch an idea before returning to another project. Unlike the crowded industrial shops where production schedules ruled every decision, this space belonged entirely to imagination. Here, questions mattered more than deadlines, and possibilities mattered more than convention. During the months that followed, one patent after another began taking shape. The alternating current motor reached practical perfection. New electrical generators followed. Transformers, transmission systems, and methods for distributing electrical power gradually formed a complete family of inventions rather than isolated discoveries. This was perhaps Nikola's greatest strength. He did not invent individual machines. He imagined entire systems in which every component strengthened every other. He saw connections where others saw separate devices. By the spring of 1888, the time had come to present his work publicly. Engineers from across the United States gathered before the American Institute of Electrical Engineers, eager to hear about the strange new system that had begun attracting attention. Many arrived with skepticism. Direct current already dominated the electrical industry, and few believed an unknown immigrant possessed an idea capable of challenging it. Nevertheless, curiosity filled the lecture hall. As Nikola stepped forward to begin his presentation, he spoke quietly, without theatrical gestures or exaggerated promises. Instead of attacking existing technology, he carefully explained the scientific principles behind alternating current. Diagrams illustrated rotating magnetic fields. Demonstrations showed motors operating with remarkable smoothness. Calculations revealed how electricity could travel far greater distances than existing systems allowed. Rather than relying upon dramatic language, Nikola allowed the beauty of the engineering itself to persuade his audience. Little by little, expressions of doubt gave way to genuine fascination. Among those listening that day was a man whose decision would change both their lives. His name was George Westinghouse. Westinghouse was already one of America's most respected industrialists, known for improving railroad safety through his air brake system. Unlike many businessmen, he possessed enough engineering knowledge to recognize genuine innovation when he saw it. While others focused on immediate profits, he often looked toward the long-term future. As he listened to Nikola describe alternating current, he understood something many people in the room had not yet fully grasped. This was not simply another invention. It was the foundation of an entirely new electrical age. After the lecture, Westinghouse requested a private meeting. The conversation lasted for hours. Nikola explained every aspect of the system with characteristic precision, answering technical questions one after another without hesitation. Westinghouse listened carefully, occasionally asking for clarification, but more often smiling quietly as the full significance of the inventions became increasingly clear. By the end of their discussion, he had reached a conclusion that would soon reshape the entire electrical industry. He wanted to purchase the patents. The agreement that followed represented far more than a business transaction. Westinghouse agreed to pay a substantial sum for the rights to Tesla's inventions, while also offering ongoing royalty payments based upon future electrical production. For Nikola, who had spent months digging ditches simply to survive, the transformation seemed almost unbelievable. Within a remarkably short time, he had moved from manual labor back to the center of technological progress. More importantly, his inventions would finally receive the opportunity to prove themselves on a national scale. The partnership between Tesla and Westinghouse united two very different but remarkably compatible men. Nikola supplied visionary engineering, unlike anything the world had seen before. Westinghouse supplied practical experience, manufacturing capability, financial resources, and the courage to challenge an industry already dominated by powerful competitors. Together, they possessed something that frightened established interests more than any single invention ever could. They possessed a better idea. Yet, success rarely arrives without resistance. The growing popularity of alternating current threatened enormous financial investments built around direct current systems. Companies that had spent years constructing one electrical network suddenly faced the possibility that a superior technology might replace it. Fortunes, reputations, and entire business empires now stood at risk. Many powerful figures had no intention of surrendering quietly. Before long, America would witness one of the fiercest technological rivalries in modern history. A struggle remembered today as the War of Currents. It would become far more than a disagreement between engineers. It would become a battle over fear and hope, tradition and innovation, money and truth. And at the center of that storm stood the quiet inventor who had once crossed the Atlantic, carrying nothing more than a suitcase, a recommendation letter, and an idea the world had almost refused to believe. The conflict that followed would eventually become known as the War of Currents. But at the beginning, it did not resemble a war at all. There were no armies, no battlefields, and no formal declarations. Instead, the struggle unfolded through newspapers, public demonstrations, business contracts, and competing visions of the future. On one side stood the established direct current system, championed by Thomas Edison. On the other stood the rapidly emerging, alternating current technology developed by Nikola Tesla and backed by George Westinghouse. Beneath the technical arguments lay something much larger. Whoever won this contest would help determine how the modern world received electricity for generations to come. Edison understood the danger immediately. His companies had invested enormous sums in direct current infrastructure, and entire business strategies depended upon its continued success. Replacing that system would not simply require new machines. It would force investors to admit that years of expensive construction had been built upon a technology with serious limitations. From a business perspective, the the stakes could hardly have been higher. If alternating current succeeded, it would threaten not only profits, but also reputations carefully built over many years. Rather than quietly accepting the challenge, Edison launched a determined campaign against alternating current. Newspapers began publishing alarming stories, describing the dangers of high-voltage electricity. Public lectures warned audiences that the new system placed ordinary families at unnecessary risk. Demonstrations were organized to convince communities that alternating current was not merely different from direct current, but fundamentally more dangerous. Fear became one of the most powerful tools in the competition, because frightened people rarely stopped to examine complicated engineering principles. Some of the demonstrations shocked even those who supported Edison. Animals were intentionally electrocuted before public audiences in an effort to associate alternating current with death rather than progress. The message was simple and emotionally powerful. If this form of electricity could kill so quickly, then surely it had no place inside homes, schools, or city streets. Few spectators possessed the technical knowledge necessary to understand that almost any electrical system could become dangerous under certain conditions. Many remembered only the disturbing images placed before them. The campaign reached an even darker chapter when the state of New York searched for a new method of carrying out executions. Supporters of direct current quietly encouraged officials to adopt alternating current for the electric chair, believing that if the public forever connected Tesla's system with capital punishment, confidence in the technology might never recover. It was a calculated effort to shape public perception through emotion rather than scientific evidence. Although Nikola had no involvement whatsoever in the development of the execution device, his inventions suddenly found themselves linked to one of the most unsettling symbols of the era. For Nikola, these attacks were deeply disappointing, though perhaps not surprising. He had never viewed electricity as a weapon or an instrument of fear. To him, it represented one of nature's most beautiful forces, capable of lifting humanity into an entirely new age. Rather than responding through personal attacks, he chose a different path. He believed that truth would eventually reveal itself through demonstration. If people could witness alternating current operating safely and efficiently, they would no longer need to rely upon frightening stories or exaggerated claims. While newspapers continued debating the future of electricity, engineers inside Westinghouse's company focused on something far more important. They continued building practical systems. Power stations expanded, transformers improved, transmission lines stretched farther than direct current had ever been able to reach economically. Each successful installation became quiet evidence that the new technology was not merely theoretical. It worked. Factories relied upon it. Businesses invested in it. Communities began seeing results with their own eyes, instead of relying upon alarming headlines. Even so, the financial pressure remained enormous. Constructing a new electrical network required staggering amounts of money. Investors grew nervous as competition intensified. Lawsuits, patent disputes, and commercial rivalries consumed valuable resources. At one point, Westinghouse himself faced severe financial strain. Advisors warned that the royalty payments promised to Nikola under their agreement might eventually become impossible to sustain. What had once appeared to be an ideal partnership suddenly found itself threatened by economic reality rather than scientific failure. When Westinghouse finally explained the situation to Nikola, the conversation revealed something remarkable about the inventor's character. The original contract entitled him to royalties that, had they continued for decades, might have made him one of the wealthiest individuals in history. Yet, as he listened to Westinghouse describe the company's financial difficulties, Nikola understood that insisting upon every legal right might destroy the very system he had spent his life creating. Without hesitation, he reportedly agreed to release or dramatically reduce those royalty obligations. Many historians have debated the exact details surrounding that decision. but its significance remains extraordinary, regardless of the specific numbers involved. Most people dream of becoming wealthy through a great invention. Nikola willingly stepped away from a fortune because he believed the success of alternating current mattered more than personal riches. He wanted the technology to survive, even if his own financial future became uncertain. It was a decision almost impossible to imagine in today's world, yet entirely consistent with the way he viewed science throughout his life. His friends admired the generosity, but worried about the consequences. They understood something Nikola often seemed unwilling to consider. Inventions may change the world, but inventors still need food, shelter, and financial security. By placing his vision above his fortune, he protected the future of alternating current while quietly sacrificing the wealth that might have guaranteed comfort for the rest of his own life. It would not be the last time he made such a choice. As the debate continued, an opportunity emerged that neither side could ignore. The organizers of the World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago announced plans for a grand international exhibition celebrating progress, industry, science, and culture. Millions of visitors from around the world were expected to attend. The event would become one of the greatest public showcases of modern technology ever attempted. Among its many challenges was one question carrying enormous symbolic importance: which electrical system would illuminate the entire fair? Winning the contract meant far more than supplying electricity. It meant winning public confidence before an international audience. Every major company understood what was at stake. Edison's supporters believed direct current should naturally receive the honor because of its established reputation. Westinghouse submitted a competing proposal built around alternating current technology. The decision would influence not only business contracts, but also the imagination of an entire generation. After careful consideration, the organizers selected Westinghouse. It was a stunning victory. For the first time, alternating current would power one of the largest public events ever assembled. The responsibility was enormous. Failure would become international embarrassment. Success could permanently transform public opinion. Engineers worked tirelessly, preparing thousands of lights, generators, transformers, and kilometers of wiring before the exhibition finally opened its gates. Every connection had to function flawlessly. Every component had to demonstrate reliability under extraordinary demand. As opening night approached, anticipation spread throughout Chicago. Few people had ever seen electric illumination on such a magnificent scale. Then, the moment arrived. As darkness settled across the fairgrounds, thousands upon thousands of electric lights burst into life, almost simultaneously. Buildings glowed with breathtaking brilliance. Fountains shimmered beneath white light. Towers, walkways, exhibition halls, and gardens seemed transformed into something almost dreamlike. Visitors stood in stunned silence before erupting into applause. Many later described the experience as though they had stepped into the future itself. Among those walking through the illuminated grounds was Nikola Tesla. For him, the spectacle represented far more than personal victory. It was proof that the ideas born years earlier beneath the trees of Budapest could now light an entire city. The world was finally beginning to see what he had always imagined, and an even greater test still waited just beyond the horizon. High above the roaring waters of Niagara Falls, one of the oldest dreams of his childhood was quietly preparing to become reality. For Nikola, the dazzling lights of the Chicago World's Fair were not the end of a journey, but the beginning of something even greater. As visitors wandered through brilliantly illuminated buildings, marveling at a future they had never imagined possible, he could not help remembering a much quieter moment from his childhood. Many years earlier, while listening to stories about a distant waterfall, he had pictured enormous wheels turning beneath rushing water and carrying electricity across the land. At the time, adults had smiled politely at what sounded like the impossible dream of an imaginative boy. Now that dream no longer seemed impossible. It simply waited for the right opportunity. That opportunity stood at one of the most extraordinary natural landmarks on Earth. Niagara Falls had inspired travelers, painters, and poets for generations. Millions of gallons of water poured over its cliffs every minute, with a force that seemed almost beyond comprehension. People admired its beauty, photographed its mist, and stood in awe of its thunderous roar. Nikola saw something different, where others saw a magnificent wonder of nature. He saw energy patiently flowing day after day, year after year, asking only for someone to understand how to use it. For decades, engineers had argued about the best way to harness the falls. Many proposals had been discussed, but none had offered a practical solution capable of transmitting large amounts of electricity over long distances. Direct current simply could not deliver power efficiently to cities many kilometers away. If Niagara was ever going to become more than a local source of energy, a completely different system would be required. That realization gradually brought the attention of investors, engineers, and industrial leaders back to the work of Nikola Tesla. After the success of the Chicago Exposition, confidence in alternating current had grown dramatically. What had once been dismissed as a dangerous experiment had now proven itself before millions of visitors from around the world. Businesses that had previously hesitated now began reconsidering their assumptions. Newspapers wrote with increasing admiration about the possibilities of long-distance electrical transmission. Slowly, but unmistakably, public opinion shifted. The future no longer belonged exclusively to direct current. Alternating current had earned its place in the conversation. When the commission responsible for developing the Niagara project evaluated competing proposals, the decision carried enormous importance. This would not simply be another electrical installation, it would become the largest hydroelectric project ever attempted. Failure would damage public confidence for years. Success would forever change the relationship between humanity and natural energy. After careful study, the commission chose a system based largely upon Tesla's alternating current patents and the manufacturing capabilities of George Westinghouse's company. For Nikola, the announcement carried a deeply personal meaning. He rarely allowed emotion to overwhelm him in public, but friends noticed a quiet satisfaction, unlike anything they had seen before. This was more than professional recognition. It was the fulfillment of a promise he had unknowingly made to himself as a child, lying awake after hearing stories about the great waterfall. Some dreams remain with us so long that they become part of our identity. Realizing them feels less like achieving success and more like returning to something that has always belonged to us. Construction demanded extraordinary cooperation between engineers, builders, machinists, and investors. Enormous turbines had to be designed to withstand unimaginable forces. Generators, unlike any previously constructed, required exceptional precision. Transmission equipment needed to carry electricity safely across long distances without sacrificing efficiency. Every stage presented challenges that had never before been encountered. Many of the people involved understood they were no longer improving existing technology. They were creating an entirely new chapter in industrial history. Throughout the project, Nikola continued refining technical details, while Westinghouse oversaw the immense practical responsibilities of manufacturing and installation. Their partnership remained one of the most productive relationships in the history of engineering. Each respected what the other contributed. Nikola imagined systems no one else could yet see. Westinghouse possessed the courage and organizational ability required to transform those visions into functioning reality. Together, they accomplished what neither man could have achieved entirely alone. The months passed beneath constant pressure. Deadlines approached. Unexpected technical difficulties appeared without warning. Critics continued predicting failure. Many supporters of direct current remained convinced that alternating current would never prove reliable on such an enormous scale. Every setback became another opportunity for skeptics to question the entire project. Yet the engineers refused to abandon their confidence. Each obstacle yielded eventually to careful thought, patient testing, and relentless determination. Finally, the day arrived when the first generators stood ready. Workers moved carefully through the massive powerhouse, making final inspections before the system came to life. Enormous turbines waited beneath the building, connected to the unstoppable force of the rushing water outside. Engineers checked instruments one last time. Conversations grew quieter. Even experienced workers sensed they were participating in something future generations would remember, long after their own names had been forgotten. When the machinery finally began turning, the movement appeared almost graceful. Despite its immense power, water flowing through the turbines created steady mechanical motion, and that motion became electricity through generators designed according to principles Nikola had imagined years before. There was no dramatic explosion of light. Instead, something even more remarkable occurred. Invisible energy began its journey away from the river, traveling through transmission lines toward distant communities, waiting unknowingly for history to arrive. The true miracle revealed itself sometime later when the city of Buffalo, located many kilometers from Niagara Falls, received electrical power generated by the waterfall. Lights illuminated streets that had never before known such dependable energy. Factories expanded their operations. Businesses gained new opportunities. Ordinary families experienced a level of convenience that previous generations could scarcely have imagined. For the first time, a great natural force had been successfully transformed into electrical power, capable of serving an entire city far from its source. Newspapers around the world celebrated the achievement. Engineers from Europe traveled to study the project. Governments examined its methods while planning electrical systems of their own. What had once seemed like an uncertain theory now stood before humanity as undeniable proof. Alternating current could power modern civilization. The debate that had dominated the war of currents was, for all practical purposes, over. The future had quietly chosen its direction. People naturally praised Westinghouse for his leadership and admired the remarkable scale of the engineering accomplishment. They also spoke increasingly about the quiet inventor whose ideas had made the entire project possible. Nikola suddenly found himself celebrated as one of the greatest electrical minds of his generation. Invitations to lecture arrived from respected scientific organizations. Journalists requested interviews. Universities admired his achievements. For the first time in his life, widespread recognition finally seemed to match the extraordinary scope of his imagination. Yet fame affected him differently than it affected many public figures. While others might have paused to enjoy success, Nikola treated each achievement as little more than another beginning. The completion of the Niagara project did not satisfy his curiosity. If anything, it convinced him that humanity had only taken its first small step toward understanding electricity. Even while the world celebrated alternating current, his thoughts had already moved beyond wires, generators, and power stations. He had begun imagining something even more astonishing. What if electricity no longer required wires at all? What if energy itself could move freely through the air? What if information could travel instantly across continents without physical connections? To many people, such questions sounded no more realistic than the childhood dream of harnessing Niagara Falls had once sounded. But history had already taught one important lesson. Dismissing Nikola Tesla simply because an idea seemed impossible had become a very dangerous habit. The world believed it had just witnessed the greatest achievement of his career. Nikola believed he was only getting started. While newspapers celebrated his achievements and scientific organizations praised the success of alternating current, Nikola Tesla had already begun drifting toward questions that few other engineers dared to ask. Most inventors were satisfied after solving one great problem. Tesla seemed almost incapable of remaining in the same place for long. The moment one vision became reality, another appeared beyond it. even more ambitious than the last. He no longer dreamed merely of generating electricity more efficiently. He began wondering whether wires themselves might someday become unnecessary. To many people, electrical wires seemed as permanent as roads or rivers. They connected power stations to factories, businesses, and homes, carrying energy exactly where it was needed. Tesla respected the remarkable achievement alternating current had made possible, yet he could not ignore what appeared to him as another limitation. If nature filled the atmosphere with invisible forces, perhaps electricity could travel through that same invisible world without depending upon endless networks of copper. The idea sounded almost unbelievable. But then again, many of his earlier ideas had sounded equally impossible. His curiosity gradually led him toward experiments involving extremely high frequencies and enormous electrical voltages. These were not projects designed merely to improve existing equipment. They sought to understand electricity itself at a deeper level. Inside his laboratory, strange devices began appearing on workbenches: towering coils, polished metal spheres, carefully wound transformers, and complicated circuits surrounded him. Visitors often struggled to understand what they were seeing. The laboratory looked less like a traditional workshop and more like the setting of a story about the future. Whenever Tesla demonstrated his experiments, audiences responded with astonishment. Great streams of artificial lightning filled the room, stretching through the air in brilliant shades of blue and violet. Sparks leaped across astonishing distances, while deep electrical sounds echoed from every direction. Standing calmly in the center of these displays, Tesla seemed almost untouched by the forces surrounding him. To spectators unfamiliar with electrical science, the performances appeared closer to magic than engineering. Newspapers eagerly described him as a modern wizard capable of commanding lightning itself. Yet Tesla disliked being viewed as an entertainer. Behind every dramatic demonstration lay careful scientific reasoning. He understood that people often remembered what they could see more easily than what they could calculate. If a spectacular experiment encouraged society to think differently about electricity, then the spectacle served a purpose. Beneath every flash of light stood years of disciplined study, mathematical understanding, and patient experimentation. Beauty and science, in his mind, were never enemies. They simply revealed different sides of the same truth. Among the many inventions born during this remarkable period was the device that would later become known as the Tesla coil. Although it appeared simple compared with some of his larger dreams, its importance reached far beyond the laboratory. The coil produced extremely high voltages and high-frequency, alternating currents, opening entirely new possibilities for scientific research. Decades later, principles first explored through these experiments would influence radio technology, wireless communication, medical equipment, and countless other fields that Tesla himself could scarcely have imagined in complete detail. As his reputation continued growing, invitations arrived from universities, engineering societies, and wealthy patrons eager to witness his work. Lecture halls filled with professors, industrialists, journalists, and curious members of the public. Unlike many speakers who relied heavily upon prepared notes, Tesla often spoke from memory with remarkable confidence. Complex scientific ideas flowed naturally from one subject to another. Listeners frequently commented not only on his intelligence, but also on the calm elegance with which he explained even the most difficult concepts. Despite increasing fame, Tesla remained personally reserved. He dressed with exceptional care, valued punctuality, and maintained strict daily routines that rarely changed. Colleagues noticed that he preferred eating alone whenever possible, and often walked long distances each evening after finishing work. Conversation interested him, but idle social gatherings did not. He enjoyed discussing science, philosophy, literature, and music. Yet he quickly withdrew whenever discussions became superficial. His mind seemed permanently occupied by questions that reached beyond ordinary daily concerns. During these years, he also formed friendships with several remarkable figures from the artistic and literary world. Among them was the celebrated writer Mark Twain, whose humor and curiosity complemented Tesla's quieter personality in unexpected ways. The two men spent many evenings talking inside the laboratory, while experiments continued around them. Twain admired Tesla's imagination, while Tesla appreciated the author's ability to see wonder within ordinary life. Their friendship reminded many observers that creativity often crosses the boundaries separating science from art. Success, however, brought new expectations. Investors increasingly encouraged Tesla to pursue projects promising immediate financial returns, and businessmen looked for inventions that could be manufactured quickly and sold profitably. Tesla listened politely, but commercial success rarely inspired him as deeply as scientific possibility. Whenever forced to choose between a safe improvement and a revolutionary idea, he almost always chose the more difficult path. It was a habit that made him one of history's greatest visionaries, but it also planted the seeds of many future disappointments. One question had begun occupying more of his thoughts than any other. If electrical energy could perhaps travel without wires, could information do the same? At the time, communication depended heavily upon telegraph lines stretching across countries and beneath oceans. Messages moved far faster than in previous generations, yet they still required physical connections, linking one place to another. Tesla imagined something radically different. Perhaps the Earth itself could become part of a worldwide system, carrying both energy and communication through invisible waves. The idea seemed astonishing, even to many experienced scientists. Critics argued that such ambitions belonged more to fantasy than engineering. Supporters urged him to remain focused on projects already proven successful. After all, he had recently transformed the electrical industry. Why risk such an extraordinary reputation by chasing ideas that appeared almost impossible to demonstrate? Tesla listened respectfully, but history had already taught him an important lesson. Almost every great achievement begins life wearing the disguise of impossibility. Determined to push his research further, he searched for a place where larger experiments could be conducted safely. The crowded streets of New York no longer provided enough space for the enormous electrical forces he wished to investigate. His equipment grew larger, voltages increased dramatically. Each experiment demanded greater distances and greater freedom than an urban laboratory could comfortably provide. Eventually, his search led him westward toward the wide-open landscapes of Colorado Springs, where both the altitude and the available space offered opportunities unavailable anywhere else. Before leaving, Tesla spoke confidently with friends about the future. He believed humanity stood on the threshold of an entirely new age. One day, he predicted, voices, images, and information would travel instantly across vast distances without wires. Ships at sea would communicate with distant continents. People separated by oceans would exchange messages almost immediately. Eventually, portable devices might allow individuals to remain connected wherever they traveled. To many listeners, such predictions sounded wonderfully imaginative, yet hopelessly unrealistic. Today, many of those ideas seem almost ordinary. That is one of the strange qualities of genuine vision. When first spoken, it often sounds impossible. Once achieved, people quickly forget that it was ever doubted. As preparations for Colorado Springs continued, Tesla felt the same quiet excitement that had accompanied many earlier turning points in his life. The boy, who had once watched blue sparks dance across a cat's fur, had grown into a man determined to understand electricity more deeply than anyone before him. The young engineer, who had imagined harnessing Niagara Falls, had already watched that dream become reality. Now, another challenge stood waiting, larger and more uncertain than any he had attempted before. He believed he was about to unlock one of the greatest scientific mysteries of the modern age. He could not yet know that the pursuit of that dream would bring both breathtaking discoveries and the beginning of the long decline that would eventually leave one of history's greatest inventors standing almost alone against the fraction, the future he had tried so hard to create. Colorado Springs seemed almost unreal when Nikola Tesla first arrived. Wide-open plains stretched toward distant mountains beneath enormous skies that appeared to have no end. Compared with the crowded streets of New York, the landscape felt silent, almost untouched. But it was not the scenery that had brought him there. It was the space. He needed room for experiments, too dangerous and too ambitious to perform in a crowded city. If his theories about wireless energy held any truth, this isolated place would become the stage upon which they would finally be tested. A large wooden laboratory soon rose from the open ground. From the outside, it looked simple enough, but inside stood some of the most unusual electrical equipment ever assembled. Giant coils reached toward the ceiling. Massive transformers occupied entire sections of the building. Thick copper conductors connected experimental devices unlike anything visitors had ever seen. Every piece of equipment served a single purpose. Tesla wanted to produce electrical forces powerful enough to explore whether energy itself could travel through the earth and the atmosphere without depending upon wires. The experiments quickly became extraordinary. When the machinery came alive, enormous bolts of artificial lightning exploded through the laboratory, stretching dozens of feet across the air. Thunder echoed across the surrounding plains, while brilliant flashes illuminated the night sky. People living several kilometers away claimed they could see strange lights dancing above the building after sunset. Some believed a terrible storm had appeared without clouds. Others whispered that mysterious forces beyond human understanding were being awakened somewhere beyond the edge of town. Tesla remained remarkably calm amid the spectacle, while assistants watched with equal parts excitement and concern. He carefully observed every spark, every sound, and every movement of his instruments. To him, these breathtaking displays were not performances, they were conversations with nature. Each experiment answered one question, while creating several new ones. Every successful result strengthened his belief that the invisible world contained possibilities far beyond what conventional science was willing to imagine. During one famous experiment, the electrical currents became so powerful that the local power station failed, leaving parts of Colorado Springs without electricity. Technicians struggled to understand what had happened until they eventually realized that Tesla's laboratory had overloaded the system itself. While many people would have viewed such an incident as a disastrous mistake, Tesla reacted with quiet fascination. To him, it demonstrated that electrical forces could interact with the surrounding environment on a scale few had previously considered possible. Through months of careful observation, he became increasingly convinced that the Earth itself behaved like an enormous electrical conductor. If that understanding proved correct, then energy might someday be transmitted across vast distances without traditional transmission lines. He imagined a world where remote villages could receive electricity without building endless networks of wires. Ships crossing oceans might remain connected to the mainland. Information and power could move freely around the globe, limited only by human imagination rather than physical infrastructure. A few people shared his confidence. Many respected scientists admired his intelligence, while privately doubting his conclusions. Investors became increasingly cautious because the practical applications remained difficult to explain. Even some close supporters wondered whether his vision had begun moving too far ahead of existing technology. Tesla listened politely, but refused to abandon the path he believed nature itself had revealed. Throughout his life, he had learned that being understood immediately was rarely the companion of genuine innovation. When When the Colorado experiments concluded, he returned to New York, carrying notebooks filled with observations and an ambition greater than ever before. He no longer wished merely to demonstrate wireless transmission inside a laboratory. He wanted to build a facility capable of proving the concept on a global scale. In his imagination, towers would one day rise across continents, transmitting both electrical power and communication through the atmosphere, connecting humanity in ways no previous generation had considered possible. That vision soon attracted one of the most influential financiers in America, John Pierpont Morgan. Tesla explained that he intended to construct an experimental transmission station unlike anything ever attempted. Morgan agreed to provide financial support, believing the project might strengthen international wireless communication. With funding finally secured, construction began on a massive structure at Shoreham, on Long Island. The project became known as Wardenclyffe Tower, and Tesla regarded it as the most important undertaking of his entire career. The tower gradually rose above the surrounding landscape, crowned by a large spherical dome that immediately captured public attention. Visitors wondered what purpose such an unusual building could possibly serve. Some imagined it was simply another radio station. Others believed it would become an enormous electrical generator. Very few understood what Tesla truly hoped to accomplish. He envisioned nothing less than a worldwide system capable of transmitting information, communication, and eventually electrical energy without wires. It was a dream so ambitious that even many scientists struggled to comprehend its full scope. While construction continued, events beyond Tesla's control began changing the world around him. Another inventor, Guglielmo Marconi, achieved increasing success with wireless telegraphy. Although Marconi relied upon several principles that Tesla had explored years earlier, his system focused on the simpler goal of communication rather than wireless power. Investors naturally preferred technologies that promised quicker financial returns. Newspapers celebrated Marconi's achievements, while Tesla's far grander vision became increasingly difficult to explain to people concerned primarily with immediate profit. John Pierpont Morgan soon began asking practical questions. When would the project produce revenue? How would it compete with existing communication systems? Why should additional money continue flowing into an undertaking whose ultimate purpose seemed to grow more ambitious every time Tesla described it? The inventor answered honestly. He admitted that wireless communication represented only the beginning. His true objective was to distribute electrical energy freely across the globe. For Morgan, those words changed everything. The financier had agreed to support a commercial communication system. He had not agreed to finance a plan that might eventually make energy available without traditional commercial control. Additional funding never arrived. Construction slowed. Workers left. Equipment remained unfinished. The magnificent tower that had once represented limitless possibility gradually became a monument to interrupted ambition. Tesla searched desperately for new investors, but confidence had begun shifting elsewhere. Financial markets grew uncertain. Technological competition intensified. Many people who had once admired his bold imagination now quietly questioned whether he had reached beyond what was realistically achievable. Each rejection wounded him, not because he feared personal failure, but because he believed humanity was turning away from opportunities that might never return within his lifetime. Eventually, Wardenclyffe Tower stood abandoned. Years later, financial pressures forced the property into foreclosure, and the great structure was demolished for scrap. As workers dismantled the tower piece by piece, they unknowingly destroyed far more than wood and steel. They dismantled the physical symbol of one man's greatest dream. Tesla watched the project disappear with remarkable composure. Yet, friends noticed that something inside him had changed. Disappointment no longer arrived as a temporary visitor. It had begun making itself at home. The years that followed grew increasingly lonely. Younger inventors captured public attention, while industries moved in new directions. Tesla continued working continued imagining, and continued filling notebooks with ideas. But securing financial support became harder with every passing year. The world eagerly adopted inventions that reflected pieces of his earlier work, yet the man himself gradually drifted toward the margins of public memory. Recognition arrived less frequently than silence. He never married, believing that complete devotion to scientific discovery required sacrifices most people could scarcely imagine. Instead, he developed an unusual affection for the pigeons that gathered each day in the parks of New York. He fed them faithfully and often spoke of them with genuine tenderness. One white pigeon in particular became deeply important to him. When friends questioned this attachment, Tesla simply smiled. Affection, like genius, often follows paths that logic alone cannot fully explain. In his later years, he lived quietly in hotel rooms, surrounded by notebooks containing ideas that remained unfinished. Many people who passed him on the streets had no idea they were walking beside one of the greatest inventors in modern history. The man whose discoveries helped illuminate cities now struggled to pay for modest accommodations. The visionary who had imagined a connected world watched another generation build upon foundations he had helped create, often without realizing whose hands had first laid the stones. On a cold January evening in 1943, the long journey finally came to an end. Nikola Tesla passed away alone in his hotel room at the age of 86. There was no public ceremony waiting outside his door, no finale lecture, no dramatic farewell, only silence, much like the silence that had welcomed the beginning of this story. Days later, government officials carefully examined his papers, recognizing that even after death, the ideas left behind by such a remarkable mind might still possess extraordinary value today. More than a century after his greatest discoveries, the world lives inside a future that Tesla glimpsed long before others could imagine it. Electricity flows across continents through alternating current systems descended from his vision. Wireless communication connects billions of people every day. Remote technologies, automation, and countless scientific advances continue echoing ideas he once explored in quiet laboratories filled with sparks and impossible dreams. His life reminds us that history does not always reward those who see the future first. Sometimes, the people who illuminate the path spend much of their own lives walking through darkness, yet light does not remember who first carried it. It simply continues, traveling forward, quietly changing every life it touches. And perhaps that is the most fitting legacy Nikola Tesla could ever have left behind.